Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, masters, mistresses.
Hi, Dr. Alex here, and welcome to Beyond the Horizon. Once upon a time, the BBC used to produce good science documentaries. But that was before 2012, and since then they've only produced basically talking heads, personalities on screen, edutainment extravaganzas, and the information-heavy documentaries, which were still really entertaining and really well shot and put together, fell by the wayside, as I say, from about 2012 onwards. For more details, see my other video, When the BBC Became Worthless. Link is in the description. The BBC did produce some fantastic science documentaries which had genuine educational value, were information heavy but presented in an exciting way that engaged the audience in spite of the demands it was making on their intelligence and ability to analyse information critically. As I say, post 2012 they became essentially educationally and informationally worthless, with almost no content in their 45 to 50 minute long episodes, which is an awful lot of time to say very little. However, I had, and in fact discovered I still have, a vast treasure trove of Horizon and other similar science documentary episodes going back from before 2012, way back even into the 90s, and maybe one or two from the 80s even. And they still have some entertainment and education value in spite of their age. As a little side note, because of their age, I flashed up that helpful little warning card at the beginning, specifically aimed at those in need of such a warning. Now you might wonder why I'm trying to resurrect these videos at all, given their great age. Well, they are, as I say, still vast mines of useful information and spurs to intelligent discussion about the topics that they are on. In many cases, they have not been superseded very much by the progress of science in the last 10 plus years since they've been made, and so a lot of the stuff in them is still absolutely current and totally up to date as far as each topic goes. And even where they're not, they only require a modicum of updating or additional information sources to be pointed out to make them 100% relevant. Looking for them now anew, it's incredibly hard to find them on any easily accessible medium. It's almost as if someone's trying to hide the great secret science knowledge that we once had. Nevertheless, because they are hard to get hold of, I have now started to try and present them in this series we have here. I'm sure you'll still enjoy them and find them both educational and entertaining. I have occasionally stepped into these videos to annotate or update or add additional information. This is either to give context to a point or clarification, or to point to further useful information on a topic which may be more up to date. Now, I am not an expert in almost all the videos which are going to be in this series. Now, I know I've got Doctor in my name, and that does mean I'm an expert, I suppose, in something, but I'm an expert in one very narrow part of cosmology. In fact, if I was going to be really specific, I'd have to say I'm an expert in cosmological perturbation theory applied to non-standard spacetimes. So even within cosmology, I have a very narrow area of knowledge. There are one or two videos in this series, and I have to say, yeah, I'm kind of an expert in this field. But in most of those cases, I am not an expert in the specific topic they're talking about. I have some information about those areas, more than others perhaps. But beyond that, and particularly when we move beyond the field of cosmology or astrophysics, I am just a moderately well-informed layperson. After each episode, I hope to do, about 10 minutes after the episode ends, a live stream called Beyond the Horizon, where myself and other interested individuals will discuss the topic raised in the Beyond the Horizon episode itself, as a group with not necessarily any expertise in it beyond what they've acquired as an interested layperson in the field of science, archaeology, and possibly history. Anyway, I think I've said about as much as I need to or can do about the purpose of this series, Beyond the Horizon, and now the episode itself. The first episode we're going to watch is Atlantis Uncovered. Now, this was made in 1999, and I was very relieved when it was made because it served a purpose that was desperately needed, and I will talk more about this actually at the start of episode 2. Now, some people still think Atlantis was a real thing. However, there was no mention of Atlantis in history, in any records, in any written documents, until Plato came along relatively late in the 300s BC, and he wrote about it in his follow-up to the Republic, Timaeus and Critias, where he was discussing his ideal society / his ideal psychological makeup for an individual to ensure they got the best from life. He was not trying to create or describe a real city or civilization. He was trying to discuss and describe an ideal to illustrate the philosophical ideas he was attempting to talk about. The Minoans were probably a source of some of the legends on which he may have even based some of his ideas of having a lost civilization. And indeed, the Minoans were known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptian records of the Minoans may have crept into ancient or classical Greek knowledge and expertise at the time, but probably not in great detail. Nevertheless, even with Plato being the only source we have for Atlantis, in terms of an actual written account where Atlantis is used as a name and has a description attached to it, it's persisted in human consciousness ever since he invented the idea, and it's had quite an impact on those who wish to study or uncover history and archaeology. And it has undeniably had an impact on archaeology. So here is the best we know on the origins of Atlantis.
Sophisticated society. The story goes that it perished in a flood around 12,000 years ago. But a few survivors escaped in ships and brought civilization to the primitive peoples around the world. Atlantis is one of the most popular yet controversial ideas of the age. Could it possibly be true? Beneath the thick canopy of the Guatemalan jungle lies a place of tantalizing mystery. When scientists first flew over these peaks 60 years ago, they thought they were the tops of volcanoes. They turned out to be the pyramids of an ancient, lost city. They called the city Nakbe.
I could see Nakbe on the horizon, and I knew that it needed to be investigated because of the implications that it had for the development of civilization. What were the processes that led a simple hunting and gathering group to a great and magnificent ancient civilization? And I felt like it was necessary to get to Nakbe and understand that.
This is a place that might solve the greatest mystery of our past. How did humans rise from barbarity to civilization? It's the question that drives archaeology.
This is a fabulous site. It's a wonderful opportunity to view the human process in action with an ancient window.
Most archaeologists believe civilization did not come from Atlantis. But if they dig deep enough at places like Nakbe, perhaps they'll find their role. Archaeologists have been discovering lost cities like Nakbe since the first Europeans went in search of colonies abroad. All over the world, in places that were totally unconnected, they stumbled upon the spectacular remains of ancient societies. The locals often knew nothing about the people who built these monuments.
Archaeology was conducted largely by adventurers and rogues. You went out to some horrible place in the middle of nowhere and discovered some ancient kingdom or lost civilization. And after all, if you have people finding forgotten tombs in ancient Egypt and people finding lost civilizations in the middle of the tropical rainforest of Mexico, certainly must have piqued people's curiosity at the time.
The ancient world they discovered was full of impossible coincidences. Of all the structures they could have built, ancient civilizations on both sides of the Atlantic chose to build pyramids. Of all the ways of disposing of their dead, they had mummified them. Instead of alphabets, they had written in strange pictures, hieroglyphs. Archaeologists had no way of dating most of these wonders. To many, it seemed inconceivable that these similar societies could have evolved separately. It was logical to think they'd all started as one unique culture that spread. But others disagreed.
There really was a dilemma as to whether human civilization had a single origin or whether, in fact, complex society, civilization, is something that happened independently in Egypt, in China, in Mesoamerica, in a whole series of places. And that really was a hotly debated dilemma.
One solution to this dilemma emerged from the depths of mythology. It was Plato who first wrote of a super-civilization, Atlantis, lost in a flood long ago.
As I mentioned in the introduction, Plato was not seeking to write an actual true historical account of this civilization and society of Atlantis. The purpose of him doing this was to illustrate something he couldn't argue properly, rationally, using pure argument. Plato was quite well known for using myths and legends where his ability to reason a point out exactly failed him. And he did this quite openly. I mean, he, in many instances in the Republic, for example, says, well, I can't actually give you the good reasons to why I believe this, or I think it will take too long for me to do so, but I'll give you this myth as to why I think this is the way things are. But obviously this is not really an argument. You have to go away and discover whether or not I've told you the truth or not. Plato was a very honest arguer when it came to philosophy and reason, and he always gave massive signposts when he wasn't sure about something. He was very honest. By the way, all his dialogues are done through the mouthpiece of Socrates, but basically saying much, if any of this is actually Socrates' words, is kind of misleading. This is all Plato all the way through. By the time we get to Republic, this is quite mature Plato. It's further removed from his teacher's words, Socrates, than you could possibly get. The last two books I'm going to mention is Timaeus and Critias, which is the sequel, if you like, to the Republic, very short books. And that's where he actually talks about Atlantis, sets it up perfectly as this circular island with concentric rings within it. It's all very mathematical and geometrical, which is exactly how Plato tended to think of things. He always tried to put things in mathematical terms. He was obsessed with maths, which was the cutting-edge science at the time, loved Pythagoras and Pythagorean logic and reasoning. So yeah, he tried to create this geometrically almost perfect society of Atlantis as an illustration of how a perfect society might be, and then how it might degenerate was in fact his purpose in doing it. But he was not describing a historical event. For a start, he puts his Atlantis at the Pillars of Hercules, in other words, around about Gibraltar. Now, if he was truly inspired by Thera, or Santorini as it is today, he might have put it a little bit closer to Greece, since that's where it is. But he wasn't really, as I say, describing a real historical or even a mythological event. The Minoan disaster, which may have sparked some elements of his myth, forms scant information at best. And again, saying that the Minoans were Atlanteans or were the straight progenitor of the ideas that Plato had for Atlantis is a bit of a stretch. I'm labelling this a bit because there was an Atlantis museum on Santorini, which, okay, they say in their page you can see here, this is the Museum of the Myth. But I do wonder how many people wander in there going, oh, it's a Museum of Atlantis, it must be real. No, this is a museum showing you a pretty representation of the myth that Plato invented, which itself was already an invention of Plato. It's not a historical account. Anyway, I may have gone a bit too far with this. Oh, that said, one further thing. Plato kind of puts his destruction of Atlantis about 9,000 years in his past, whereas the Minoan destruction was about 900, if that, years in his past, so a lot closer to him. Again, all this distancing, he has the account, by the way, of his Atlantis given as told to the friend of Socrates he's talking to. His grandfather's grandfather told it to his grandfather, who then told it to him, who's now telling it to Socrates. Basically, he puts all these layers between him and the story to give it the most dubious background he could possibly give it. He's saying this is not an historical account I'm giving you. He's basically telling you how dodgy this is. Don't take it as truth, take it as a myth.
After Plato, the story was forgotten for 2,000 years. But in 1882, the myth of Atlantis was resurrected by one man, Ignatius Donnelly. He argued that while the rest of the world lived in Stone Age barbarity, one group of people began to think differently. They alone embarked on the road to civilization in their homeland, Atlantis. Instead of hunting and gathering food to survive, the Atlanteans thought of farming. Over time, they developed into a complex society. They learned astronomy and evolved religion, writing, monuments and art, the key developments of civilization. Donnelly argued that it was impossible that more than one group of people could have evolved in this particular way.
So in Donnelly's mind, Atlantis is the source of all civilization, and that from the shores of Atlantis, boats went in all directions, bringing civilization to Mexico, South America, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Those cultures all are the remnant of the once great and proud civilization of Atlantis, which was right in between them.
The Atlantis theory made perfect sense. Its tremendous popularity endures today. Ken Fader has found that in a typical year, 4 out of 5 of his new archaeology students believe that Atlantis might really have existed. The idea is so pervasive that part of Fader's course is to put it to the test.
There are pyramids in Egypt. There are pyramids in Mexico. Pyramids in Egypt, pyramids in Mesoamerica, they must have a single common source. What's the source? Atlantis. In the old world, writing systems developed based on hieroglyphs, the Egyptian hieroglyphs. In the new world, the Maya wrote the hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs, the west side of the Atlantic, hieroglyphs on the east side of the Atlantic. Coincidence? If you're Ignatius Donnelly, you don't think so. There must have been a common source. Where's the common source? Halfway between Atlantis.
Since Donnelly, the flood of interest in Atlantis has never abated.
Well, come on, let's go, little darling. Tell me that you never leave me. Come on, let's go and do it again. Well, now...
A century later, it's been the subject of over 2,000 books and scores of expeditions to seek the sunken kingdom. The archaeologist's verdict?
Preposterous, misleading,
insidious,
garbage.
And you could summarize it by saying a load of codswallop.
Archaeologists revile Atlantis. Why do they reject what seems a logical theory of how civilization began? There are many reasons. One lies in a revolution in archaeology that began back in the 50s. The invention of carbon dating changed our view of the past forever. For the first time, scientists could tell the age of a site by chemically testing samples.
You might think about how you carbon dating all of these stone sites all over the world. Well, you can carbon date things which are near stone, even though if you can't carbon date the stone itself, which you normally can't. You look at things which are buried under the stones and you carbon date those. So things which are presumably buried when the stones were put in place. By the way, when it comes to Sir Arthur Evans and Knossos in Crete, there is a problem with that because he reconstructed half of the buildings as he was investigating and uncovering Knossos for the first time. That said, you can still carbon date Knossos in Crete. You just find a bit that has not been reconstructed, which a good experienced archaeologist can work out, and you look for stuff buried under the stones in those cases and then carbon date that. So yeah, carbon dating is a well-established technique. For more details on carbon dating, have a look at this fantastic SciShow overview of carbon dating and how it's used in archaeology.
When the great ancient sites around the world were dated, the results were shocking. They'd been built thousands of years apart. This was a real blow to any thought that there was a single source for all civilization.
The radiocarbon dates absolutely didn't bear it out at all. And then it turned out that the reason they didn't conform was that the basic storyline was plain wrong. So it was a very significant change.
Archaeologists now came to believe civilization had been developed independently by many different peoples. But not everyone was convinced. Despite all the evidence, Atlantis grew even more popular. The myth has been endlessly reinvented to explain the mysterious similarities between the ancient cultures. Erich von Däniken famously claimed the lost civilization came from outer space.
I try to prove that this planet has been visited by beings from outer space several times in antiquity. They made with our forefathers a kind of artificial mutation. And finally, these visits from outer space have gone into archaeological artifacts.
Chariots of the Gods sold more than 11 million copies, but scientists were horrified.
If you think of these claims, if only they were true, they would be amazingly interesting, that we have been visited by beings from elsewhere who not only have created our civilization for us, but mated with human beings. It's, in my view, much more likely to successfully mate with a petunia than an extraterrestrial.
Today, the myth is so powerful that it continues to challenge conventional science. The latest exponent, Graham Hancock, doesn't call it Atlantis, but he too puts the case for a lost civilization around 12,000 years ago.
It's perfectly possible, it's not loony, it's reasonable, it's rational, it's balanced to propose that we could have lost an episode of human history at that time. And that's what the entire mythical testimony of the world says, and the Atlantis story is just one part of a very broad tradition.
Von Däniken, Graham Hancock, etc. share one trait with me. They're not archaeologists. One difference they have with me, they're not even scientists. Von Däniken, I think the best we could describe him as a creative writer. And Graham Hancock, in fact, is a journalist, or was a journalist. Certainly that's how he started out. And we all know just how trustful they are.
The theory remains strangely irresistible. If it were true, it would mean that science has really got it wrong. The whole of human history would have to be rewritten. Excavating American Indian sites in New England, Ken Fader has become an expert in recognizing the kind of evidence that will prove whether or not Atlantis was the source of all civilization.
All this rock, as long as you cut it along a straight line, it will break along that straight line as you quarry it. What we want to do is we want to see how many of the stones...
He can spot the telltale signs of the long, uninterrupted development of a native culture over thousands of years, or the clues to a sudden arrival of strangers, like Atlanteans, from elsewhere.
There's one thing that archaeologists know, is people, wherever they go, they leave behind a mess. In this area, for example, there's a long, long sequence of ceramic manufacture by local people, by the native people. They developed pottery. They made pottery that looked like this. It's very thick-walled. There's a lot of grit added to the clay. And we find this over the course of 3,000 years here in southern New England. And we recognize this as locally made pottery. When we look at a site like this, we suddenly find a completely different style, a different kind of ceramic, glazed, painted, with a print on it. There's writing on it. We even know who made this material because it's got the name on it. We can trace that name to the potter in England. There's no intermediate step between this local pottery and this pottery. There's no sequence of development. It's abundantly clear we have a new culture, a new people moving in.
To clarify the progression of ideas concept they're trying to put forward here, they're highlighting the idea that civilization was not an idea that just popped into existence suddenly fully formed, as if it had been inserted by some higher knowledge that was suddenly implanted in a certain place, like in Egypt or implanted in Mesoamerica. They didn't just pop up fully formed. The farming technology, other technologies didn't just pop into existence in these places. There is a steady progress of ideas in all of these different places at different times as well.
The English pottery marked the moment when foreigners arrived in this part of America. The test is the same for the hallmarks of ancient civilization, like pyramids or writing. If they were brought by an Atlantean super race, they should appear suddenly, superimposed on Stone Age life with no precursors. But if the local people created them, there should be slow steps of development over thousands of years. When archaeologists study the greatest symbols of civilization, what do they find? The pyramids of Egypt were built as tombs for the pharaohs. Most celebrated are those at Giza, built around 2500 BC. But these are not the first. What came before was puzzling. At Dashur are two earlier pyramids. One of them so misshapen, it's known as the Bent Pyramid.
Both these pyramids were built by one king, by King Sneferu. And he came to this site and started on the pyramid behind us called the Bent Pyramid. As his masons were working up the pyramid, they discovered that in fact there were certain structural problems. The desert surface here is very unstable. They'd also been very slapdash about how they put the blocks together. And so the structure started to subside, and it was decided then at that point to start a new pyramid, which we call the Red Pyramid to the north.
Sneferu's builders didn't seem to know what they were doing.
We can actually tell why King Sneferu's builders ran into problems here if we look at the state of these blocks. They were using very poor quality mortar, and they were setting the core blocks in a very haphazard way. And we know that they learnt their lessons because when they started to build the Red Pyramid, they used better quality mortar, they set the blocks more carefully, and they founded the pyramid on a foundation of limestone to give it extra structural rigidity.
If these pyramids were the work of Atlanteans, they must have been dodgy builders. But Egyptologists have another explanation. They see the Bent Pyramid as clear evidence of the Egyptians learning to build through a process of trial and error. And there are pyramids even older than the Bent Pyramid. The Step Pyramid at Saqqara is a smaller and simpler structure, a whole century before Giza, the first of many steps towards perfection.
It's certainly true that pyramids do evolve, and one can trace the evolution of them through the step pyramid and finally to the true pyramids that we see behind us. They didn't appear fully fledged overnight.
But if the Atlanteans didn't bring the art of pyramid building, how did the idea begin? Archaeologists believe the answer lies 250 miles south along the Nile, in a place more mysterious still, Abydos, the ancient capital of Egypt.
As they mention Abydos here, I should probably point out that those familiar with Stargate will recognise many of the names in this portion of the video and other portions to do with Egypt. And just as easily as they recognise those names, they should be just as capable of distinguishing between science and historical fiction and fact.
Gunter Dreyer has spent the last 20 years excavating at Abydos. Hidden away in the desert, this seemed an unpromising place to look for the origins of the Great Pyramids.
In the beginning, it was a little bit a risk. We didn't know what we might find. In archaeology, you try. You may suppose things, but better try and look.
When Dreyer began to excavate, he came upon something unexpected. Something more than 600 years older than Giza.
With the first trial trench, we came upon a very large tomb. Very large tomb indeed, of a size we never expected for that period. When we dug and the first wall came out, we had a tomb there. And then another chamber beside the first one, and another, and another. It didn't stop.
An underground tomb, with chambers that had once been full of treasure. A simple version of what lies below the pyramids. This was proof of a tradition stretching back centuries. Dreyer has now excavated hundreds of tombs at Abydos. They began with simple pits in the ground, and slowly progressed to great underground monuments.
So from the very first tombs of that size, it developed over 1,000 years to that size. And the next step to the pyramids is not a bigger one than those we have seen before.
Other teams at Abydos excavated monuments built above ground. Compared to the pyramid sites, they showed remarkable similarities. The same bricks laid in the same way to build the same style of walls, with doorways in the same positions. Abydos had revealed a 1,000-year record of incremental steps leading towards the pyramids, the mark of a gradual local development. There was no trace of Atlantis. But these revelations don't explain the mystery at the heart of the Atlantean argument. The strange coincidence that pyramids were also built on the other side of the Atlantic. Central America is teeming with pyramids. Those of the Toltec, the Aztec, Teotihuacan, and most renowned of all, the Maya. Who had built all these pyramids, and were they connected to the ones in Egypt? The only way to find out was to discover their origins. The lost city of Nakbe is one of the earliest sites of the Maya. It dates from 1,000 years before the peak of Mayan civilization. Richard Hansen blazed a trail to Nakbe through the jungle. In 12 years of excavations, Hansen has left no stone unturned. He has traced Nakbe back to an original primitive settlement of wooden houses. But around 800 BC, life began slowly to develop.
As they gained in wealth and in status, they began to increase the size and scale of their houses, and they began to quarry stone. Rather crudely and in a primitive fashion, begin to extract stones of a fairly modest size. Stones of this shape, and stack them in small constructions. They get larger and larger and larger until between 600 and 400 BC, they are extracting stones of extraordinary size and dimension. These stones were up to 1 meter long and half a meter high and half a meter thick.
What Hansen has uncovered is a native tradition that grew from small stones to complex constructions over 6 centuries. Some of these ruined pyramids are among the first monuments of the Maya.
We've got monumental architecture up to 72 meters in height. We have elaborate platforms, causeways, terraces. The entire trappings of complex society is developed by this period of time.
In all his years of excavation, Hansen has found no traces of Atlanteans and no mysterious connection to the pyramids of Egypt.
This building is radically different from Egyptian pyramids. These structures served as religious temples. There are stairways going to the summit. There were rituals performed at the top. This is all part of a long tradition of architectural development and a long tradition of intense religious belief.
It took centuries more for the Maya to perfect their technique. But the Maya are only part of the Mesoamerican story. Standing alone in the Oaxaca Valley in southern Mexico is a place even more revealing than Nakbe, Monte Alban. The first archaeologists who came here couldn't tell who had built it. When the site was carbon dated, the result was a shock. These pyramids were the oldest in the Americas, older even than the first Mayan monuments of this scale. What mysterious people had built them? The only way to find the answer was to dig throughout the valley for clues. This work is still going on.
The roots, and it's in the corner of this wall, I think.
Gary and Linda Feynman are uncovering a new site, El Pamillo.
There's a second pot underneath, but that also appears to be broken.
We've had many phases of occupation up here where we have a wall, and then we have another house foundation that was placed over that wall, and then a plaster floor that was put over that later. And for several areas, we've got 3 or 4 levels of houses.
Layer after painstaking layer throughout the valley, archaeologists have sought the answer to the mystery of Monte Alban.
It's been fascinating. It's been a surprise every day. As soon as we started, it was always, oh, look at this, here's another wall. Oh, look at this, I've got plaster. Oh, look at this, I've got a burial.
Gary, we got another offering here. It's like teeth. Shell, maybe. It looks like carnivore teeth.
It looks real. What's that down there? Maybe that is a jaw.
It might be. He might have been buried
I think
with
there's
a dog.
in here. Oh my
Look,
God. That's a dog.
It's a dog. Yeah, that's a dog.
Little by little, archaeologists throughout the valley have revealed no less than the birth of a new civilization, the Zapotec, who evolved as gradually and as independently as did the Maya.
Well, what we see here is a lot of signs of continuity in terms of how people built their houses, how people buried their dead, and these things bear continuities to patterns that we see back to the earliest occupations at Monte Alban and sometimes even before.
Archaeology has revealed the startling fact that in one small corner of the world, the long road to a similar monument-building society was taken by at least 2 different groups of people independently. Proof that it could have happened all over the world, again and again. There's a simple reason why so many ancient peoples built pyramids. Before engineers had invented the dome, the spire, or structural steel, a sloping pile was the only high structure you could build. If you wanted a high, showy monument, when all there was to build with was heavy stone, it had to be a pyramid. It didn't take a master race from Atlantis to work it out.
Just to be really picky here, pyramids only? You can have mounds too as high and showy bits of monumental architecture. For example, here's a picture of Silbury Hill. However, beyond making your own hill or mound, pyramids are just the next step really. They're now a slightly more angular hill.
So let's cross off pyramids. Pyramids don't make a very good argument for Ignatius Donnelly's claim that there's a common source in the middle of the Atlantic. Well, what about writing? I mean, that's a very sophisticated technology. Well, we do have writing on both sides of the Atlantic. So does that mean there's a common source for the writing? Well, again, one would think that if there's a common source for the writing, then the writing on either side of the Atlantic would be the same, even identical, coming from the same place, Atlantis.
Writing is one of the greatest steps along the road to civilization. Could it have come from Atlantis? Had Atlantean scribes brought writing to Egypt, it should appear suddenly, a perfectly formed, complex system handed out to people who had no writing of their own. In Donnelly's day, this was a convincing idea. In every tomb and every temple, the hieroglyphs seemed equally elaborate. But at Abydos, Gunter Dreyer made an extraordinary discovery. In the first early tomb he found here, centuries older than the first known hieroglyphs, were scores of little labels with symbols. They were baffling.
We found about 160 of these little labels, most of them in one chamber on the floor. At the beginning, we didn't understand what might be the meaning of these little labels. They have holes, so they must have been fixed to something. Some show numbers, so probably they indicated sizes or amounts. But those with the animal signs made no sense in the beginning. But when we tried to read them like hieroglyphs, suddenly they made sense. Not all of them at the very beginning, but step by step we understood more and more of it.
To Dreyer, the symbols made no sense just as pictures. But when he read them according to the rules of later hieroglyphs, their meaning fell into place. They were a simple system of record keeping. How much oil was in a jar, or where a gift had come from. Dreyer had found the earliest known writing in Egypt. In later tombs, he found more and more complex inscriptions. Over 500 years, they led all the way to a full written language. The Egyptians didn't get their 3 R's from Atlantis.
Finding such objects is a great pleasure for an archaeologist. It's the best discovery you can make. And it's the greatest thing to change the border between prehistory and history.
But what could explain the apparent similarities between the Egyptian hieroglyphs and those of the Maya? The question that had fascinated the scholars of Donnelly's day. Both used pictures instead of letters. The Maya often wrote on columns called stelae, like the Egyptians. Both used symbols, that looked like strange combinations of humans and animals. Could there be a connection?
We need a system in which we have symbols. These symbols we can carve or scratch or scrape or write with ink. That's a common thread. But it's a
When Ken Fader focuses on the contrasts between the ancient writing systems rather than the similarities, things seem rather different.
If you know Egyptian hieroglyphs, can you pick up a Maya stele and read it? Absolutely not. These writing systems are not mutually intelligible. They don't share signs. They don't share even the same techniques of writing them down. The Inca, by the way, they don't have a writing system. They had quipu, and quipu were a series of knots, knotted strings, where the knots, what the knots looked like, and their position on the string, that those positions, in fact, could be read, so that there were people who knew what those strings meant, who knew what the knots meant, and could read those knots. Well, it's awfully peculiar. If Atlantis is the source of writing all over the world, well, why in the world are they giving Egyptians one kind of hieroglyphs? They're giving cuneiform writing to the folks in ancient Mesopotamia, and they're teaching the Inca to knot strings. I mean, is this some sort of bizarre social experiment that the Atlanteans are running?
And there is one final enigma. There is no symbol for Atlantis in any of these ancient writings. The first person to mention, or perhaps invent, this word is Plato, over 9,000 years after Atlantis was supposed to have existed.
If Atlantis really is, in Plato's time, 9,300 years old, then it is absolutely stunning that we have no references, zero, not a few, not some ambiguous ones, nothing, until 9,300 years after the fact. So the fact that Plato is telling us this story in 400 or 380 BC, and there's been no reference to it before that, is absolutely stunning.
Modern archaeology has told us what Ignatius Donnelly could not know. The great achievements of ancient societies were developed gradually, over millennia, in different ways, in different places, by different people. But the myth of a lost civilization lives on. Science may dismiss it as nonsense, but every year, scores of new books reach millions of eager new readers who believe in this radically different version of history. From Plato to Hancock, there's a common element. A date that keeps being connected with the lost civilization. A date around 12,000 years ago. What was happening in the world at this magic moment? And could it really be connected with Atlantis? It's known that 12,000 years ago, humans still lived in Stone Age simplicity, hunting and gathering their food. But evidence now shows around this time, they took the first great step towards civilization. They learnt to cultivate crops. What inspired this momentous leap? Did the Atlanteans come ashore with their box of seeds and their blueprint for civilization? Excavations at Abu Huraira in the Middle East revealed the answer. Here, archaeologists found a typical hunter-gatherer settlement, more than 12,000 years old. These people depended on wild grains for food. But when archaeologists began to dig, they found something perplexing.
What we expected to find from these hunter-gatherer levels at Abu Huraira was lots of wild cereals, and these are very characteristic, they're very skinny, and there were plenty of them. But very soon we started to find something that didn't belong there. It was a bit weird. These were whacking great, fat, domestic grains. They didn't belong there. These are characteristic of agriculture, cultivation of some sort. and the difference was very obvious. If you look at these grains here, I have two little skinny wild types and two chunky domestic types.
Gordon Hillman knew that native cereal grains as fat as these do not exist in the wild. They can only exist as the result of human intervention. It was clear that the hunter-gatherers had begun to plant crops. The mystery was, why? Hillman and his team found a clue. Just before the fat grains appeared, the wild cereals began to disappear. It started with those that needed most water, but later, even the hardier cereals vanished.
What we seemed to have was a drought setting in that was knocking one food plant after the other, going for ever more drought-resistant species. This changed our perspective of what was going on dramatically.
Checked against known climatological data, Hillman's evidence suddenly made sense. Fluctuations in the climate around this time plunged the whole area into drought. In a desperate bid to avoid starvation, the hunter-gatherers discovered how to plant native grasses for food. Their efforts led to the first domesticated wheat and barley.
So that there came a point when most of these communities really had no option. They were into agriculture, they were stuck with it, whether they liked it or not, and the rest, as they say, is history.
But this could not explain the onset of farming on the other side of the world. If archaeologists could show it happened independently more than once, it would destroy the Atlantean explanation. In seeking to reveal the origins of the Zapotec, archaeologists set out to find the first farmers in the Oaxaca Valley.
We knew that agricultural villages were established in the valley by 1500 BC. But how did that agriculture come about? That was a big question.
The obvious place to look for clues was in the mountains where hunter-gatherers had lived. The people here had faced a perennial problem: a life of foraging high in the mountains, where water was a long way off. When archaeologists studied the plant remains in this cave, they found evidence of an ingenious solution. The hunter-gatherers had learnt to plant, but the first thing they grew wasn't food. They grew bottled gourds, which they used to carry water. This is the first known plant domestication in the Americas, prompted not by hunger, but by practicality. It was some 6,000 years after they began planting gourds that people here finally chose to settle in villages. By that time, they were growing very different foods to those of the Near Eastern farmers: beans, chili, and maize. Had the Atlanteans brought farming to the Americas, there is no reason why they wouldn't have brought the same crops as already existed in the Near East.
You cannot say that the plants that were domesticated in the Near East would not have grown or done well here in Mesoamerica. In fact, we know that when the Spanish came over in the 16th century, what they brought with them were many of those same plants: wheat, barley, and then the animals, goat, sheep, cattle. And all of these things thrived in Mesoamerica, and you still see them today.
And there were many essential tools of farming the super race from Atlantis failed to bring. The plough and the wheel were unknown in the Americas until the Spanish brought them, just 400 years ago.
Well, I think that it would be a brave person indeed who would try to sustain an argument now against the evidence that agriculture was either introduced from some mysterious source, Atlantis or outer space or whatever, or indeed was just invented once and was then spread around the world by one or more groups of people, because the evidence just does not support that kind of interpretation.
But in spite of all the evidence, the allure of a lost civilization is more powerful now than ever. Every year, crowds flock to ancient sites in search of lost wisdom. Science continues to be ignored by a public yearning for the romance of a more mysterious past. Should this be dismissed as harmless fantasy? History has shown that fantasies about the past can lead to disaster.
It is dangerous when people have myths about their own past which have no foundation in reality. We've seen myths of that kind in our own time have tragic consequences. The National Socialists in Germany, the Nazis, had the notion of Aryan supremacy, and the Holocaust was built on pernicious myths of that kind.
Sturm, 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 läutet die Glocken von Turm zu Turm.
The Nazi idea of an Aryan elite is well documented. What is less well known is that prominent Nazis believed that the master race originated in Atlantis. One of the most passionate believers was Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. Himmler directed German scientists to seek the descendants of the Atlantean superrace in places from the Andes to Tibet. They scrutinized the physical features of the natives in search of any shred of evidence to support Himmler's notion that his Aryan ancestors, the Atlanteans, had lived there. These claims to an ancestral heritage in Atlantis fed the Nazis' belief in the supremacy of the Aryan master race.
When we come to something like the lost continent of Atlantis, we are better off knowing that civilizations developed more or less independently, just so nobody can say some people are better than others, some are smarter than others, because we know what happens down the line when we believe that.
Some people are smarter. This is measurably and demonstrably so. However, the point that Ken is trying to make here, and rightly so, is that the fact that some people are smarter has got nothing to do with their ethnicity, and he's quite right to labour this point, although perhaps should have made it a little bit clearer that that's what he meant.
So I'm not going to tell you that belief in Atlantis is necessarily the first step towards genocide or Holocaust. But what I'm telling you is we are on a very slippery slope when we believe in fantasies, and that those fantasies lead us down to places we really don't want to go.